The treehouse whispers. The treehouse had stood in Tommy's backyard for years, its worn wooden frame holding strong against the winds of time. Weathered by seasons and storms, it was a reminder of childhood innocence, a refuge for young Tommy, a place for imagining adventures or escaping the sternness of his parents. But tonight, as he climbed the rickety ladder, it felt more like a cage. At 14, Tommy often found solace in the treehouse, especially when tensions ran high at home. The day had been filled with harsh words between him and his father. Now, armed with only a blanket, a pillow, and his forbidden Nintendo DS, he sought refuge high among the branches, away from the oppressive house and the heavy atmosphere of his parents' disapproval. "Go ahead and ground me, Dad. See if I care," he muttered under his breath as he settled into the cramped space. The treehouse smelled faintly of old wood and damp moss, and the air around him carried the cool bite of October. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders, and grateful for the warmth, powered on the small handheld console. The glow of the screen cast an eerie light on his face. He lost himself in the comforting digital world of Animal Crossing, focusing on the game as a way to block out the lingering anger and disappointment that hung in the air back home. Outside, the breeze rustled through the tree branches, sending shadows dancing along the walls. The world felt far away, peaceful and calm. But as the hours dragged on and the night deepened, the comforting rhythm of the game eventually slipped into silence. Tommy, fatigued, closed the console, content to rest for a while. As he settled under the blanket, he found his eyes growing heavy, the quiet hum of the night folding around him like a cocoon. He wasn't sure how long he had slept when he woke to the sound of a voice. "Tommy? Tommy, are you up there?" The voice was soft at first, barely above a whisper. Tommy's eyes snapped open, the room plunged into cold, heart-stopping darkness. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, but there was no mistaking it. The voice was real. It echoed through the still night, carried on the wind, growing clearer as it drifted toward him. Groggy and disoriented, Tommy scrambled into a sitting position, his heart pounding in his chest. His breath came faster now, each inhalation sharp and shallow. The treehouse groaned under the weight of his movements, and the voice called again. "Tommy, I know you're up there." This time, it wasn't a distant echo. It was close, very close, and it chilled Tommy to the bone. His pulse quickened as the hairs on his neck stood on end. His hand clutched the blanket tightly, the fabric shaking in his grip. The opening to the treehouse was pitch black, but he could swear he saw something out there, a movement. His blood ran cold. Suddenly, the creaking of the ladder broke the silence. It sounded like someone was climbing up, each step slow and deliberate. Fear gripped Tommy like a vice as his gaze darted toward the opening, heart hammering in his chest. The chill of dread crawled across his skin. He thought of his father, angry and punishing, yet somehow protective. Could this be part of some cruel game? A way to torment him for the argument they had earlier? No. The figure in the opening wasn't his father. The shadowy shape of a head appeared, framed by the faint glow of starlight. It was no ordinary figure. Its features were blurry, indistinct, like a blurry patch of darkness. As it moved into the threshold, the terror that had been gnawing at Tommy's chest now flooded his entire body. This wasn't his father. It wasn't anyone he knew. It wasn't human. "Ah, there you are," the voice said. The words sent chilling tendrils of fear down Tommy's spine. Panicking, Tommy scrambled backward, pressing himself against the wall as his entire body trembled. Who are you?" he cried, his voice cracking. "Get away!" The figure did not answer, its stillness unnerving as it lingered at the edge of the opening. There was an immense, suffocating pressure in the air, as if the very presence of this being made the space smaller, closing in around Tommy. His thoughts spun, his heart rattling his chest as he searched for something, anything, to defend himself, but he found nothing. His DS. A blanket. Useless. "Dad! Dad! Help!" Tommy shouted desperately, his voice shattering the heavy silence of the night. From the house, he saw the light in his parents' bedroom flicker on, and for a split second, relief blossomed. But the figure didn't move. Instead, it took a slow, deliberate step backward. Then, without a word, it began descending the ladder, the creaking of each step mocking Tommy's growing horror. Hearing the soft thud of feet on the grass below, Tommy leaned out the window to catch a glimpse of whatever had haunted him. The shadow vanished into the darkness of the backyard, leaving nothing but an eerie stillness in its wake. Moments later, his father burst outside, flashlights sweeping over the yard in frantic arcs. "What is it? What's wrong?" he called, scanning the empty darkness. Shaking violently, Tommy climbed down the ladder, his limbs weak with fear, and fell into his father's arms. "There was someone here. They were calling my name. They were trying to get in." His voice trailed off, the words still too horrible to believe. His father's face hardened, and he shot a glance toward the treehouse, his expression unreadable. "Stay here. I'll look around." He vanished into the yard, flashlight cutting through the shadows like a blade. But when Tommy's father returned, his face was taut with uncertainty. "No one's here," he muttered, though the tension in his voice betrayed him. Probably just a prank by a neighbor. Tommy wanted to believe him. He needed to believe him. But deep down, the unease festered. The voice, the figure, the way it seemed to know his name, it all felt too purposeful, too deliberate to be dismissed as some late-night joke. That night, the family locked every door and window. Tommy lay wide awake in his bed, replaying the entire event in his mind, his heart still racing. No matter how much he wanted to ignore it, a knot of dread tightened in his stomach, and it lingered. Days passed. His father spoke to neighbors. A report was filed with the police, but despite their efforts, nothing came of it. No one else had seen anything, no clues, no explanations. Slowly, the incident began to fade for his parents, but for Tommy, it didn't. The unease remained, like a shadow just at the edge of his vision. The treehouse, once a sanctuary, now loomed like a silent witness to the terror of that night. And even when Tommy's family eventually moved away, he couldn't escape the whisper of the voice, so faint, so chilling, that seemed to follow him wherever he went. It whispered his name, distant and haunting, as if calling him back, urging him toward the place where fear first found its home. And Tommy knew one thing for certain. He would never go near that treehouse again. Rewards of a quiet house. Tom Ward was a carpenter of great skill, known in the small town for building things meant to last. His most personal project, however, was not one he built for a client, but for his own family, a secluded home on the edge of a dense forest. It was a craftsman's paradise, every wooden beam and shingle placed with care. But for all its serenity, the most cherished feature wasn't the house itself. It was the treehouse. Nestled in the tallest oak behind the property, the treehouse was meant for his two children, Sam and Lily. It was a masterpiece, a small, rustic hideaway with sturdy walls and a ladder that creaked comfortingly with use. Tom had built it with his hands and love, believing it to be a place of adventure for the kids and tranquility for the family. And for a while, it was. The forest provided a natural soundtrack of rustling leaves and birdsong. The sunsets melted gold into the trees, and Tom thought life couldn't get better. The house stayed quiet and peaceful, rewarding him with everything he'd ever dreamed of. Yet, he couldn't shake an odd feeling that had begun to stir inside him, a subtle unease that he couldn't explain. At first, it was little things. He'd be sanding wood or varnishing cabinets, and from the window he'd catch sight of movement near the treehouse, a shadow darting between the trees, perhaps a trick of the light. Other times, he would notice the ladder swaying slightly, as if something unseen had just ascended or descended. One evening, Tom was working late in his workshop when Sam came running inside. "Dad!" the boy said, breathless. "I saw something up there." "What do you mean, something?" Tom asked, frowning. "In the treehouse," Sam whispered, glancing back toward the window. It looked like a person, but it wasn't you or Lily." Tom tried to reassure his son, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. After all, children and shadows played tricks on each other. But that night, as the moon poured its silver light over the trees, Tom stood at his bedroom window and felt a prickle of unease. The treehouse looked darker than usual. Its open window seemed to stare back at him like a hollow eye. He could have sworn he saw something shift inside, just for a moment. A figure? He told himself it was ridiculous. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences continued. Sam refused to go near the treehouse, but Lily, ever curious, spent more time there. "Nothing's wrong, Dad," she'd insist. "It's just a treehouse." But Tom couldn't stop watching it. Even in the middle of the day, when the sun bathed it in warm light, the treehouse didn't feel right. It wasn't just that it seemed dark, it felt dark. One afternoon, while the children were at school, Tom decided to go up. The ladder groaned under his weight, and as his head poked into the small enclosure, a rush of icy air greeted him. The inside of the treehouse hadn't changed. It was the same space he'd built months ago, filled with toys, a scattering of books, and Lily's sketches on the walls. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was intruding, as though stepping into a place that no longer belonged to him. In one corner of the treehouse, hidden under a pile of blankets, he found something that made his blood run cold. A crude carving on one of the wooden planks. The words, scratched into the wood with shaky precision, read, "It comes when it's quiet." That night, the forest seemed louder. The rustling of leaves sounded more like whispers. From his bedroom, Tom kept glancing at the treehouse. Its single window was dark, impenetrable. And then, he saw it. A faint light flickering inside. Tom's heart slammed against his chest. Lily was asleep in her bed, and Sam had locked himself in his room out of fear. Nobody should have been in the treehouse. Grabbing his flashlight and a hammer for protection, he stepped out into the cool night. The air felt heavier than usual, and the light breeze carried a metallic tang, like the scent of a far-off storm. As he approached the treehouse, the light inside winked out, leaving the window an empty, watchful void. Tom's flashlight beam jittered as he climbed the ladder, his pulse thundering in his ears. The inside was exactly as he'd left it earlier, silent, still, abandoned. But just as he turned to descend, something brushed against his back. Tom whipped around, flashlight cutting through the gloom. At first, there was nothing. But then the beam caught something in the farthest corner. A figure. It was small and hunched, its silhouette almost human, but wrong. Too thin, with limbs that seemed to bend in unnatural ways. Its face was shadowed, but Tom could feel its eyes on him, could feel its smile stretching wide and malicious in the dark. He stumbled back, the flashlight falling from his hand and clattering to the floor. The creature crawled toward him, its movements jerky and animalistic. Tom scrambled down the ladder, heart racing, nearly twisting his ankle in his desperation to get away. Behind him, the treehouse was silent, but he swore he could feel the thing watching him through its window, its grin never fading. The next day, Tom told his wife they had to leave. He didn't care how beautiful the house was, or how hard he'd worked for their quiet reward. He didn't care that the treehouse had been a gift to their children. Something was wrong, something far beyond his understanding. But the forest wasn't done with him yet. That evening, as he packed their things, Lily went missing. "Where is she?" Tom yelled, tearing through the house in a panic. His wife was frantic, and Sam was sobbing, refusing to leave his room. Tom's heart sank as he stepped outside. The treehouse window was glowing again. "Lily!" he shouted, running toward it. He climbed the ladder as fast as he could, calling her name, his hands trembling on the rungs. The treehouse was empty when he reached the top, except for one thing. A small carving in the corner. She's quiet now. The family left the house the next day, but Tom never found Lily, and to this day, the treehouse waits. Some nights, if you stand in the forest and listen closely, you can hear faint laughter from its window, a child's voice, giggling softly. Then silence. For those who remain in the quiet too long, the treehouse is always watching, always waiting. The Marshmallow Man. The air in the suburbs of Brookmont, Maryland, was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as I took my first few hesitant steps into the backyard. Our family had just moved into the large, isolated house on the outskirts of town. A mansion, really, with more space than I could have ever imagined for just the four of us. It felt like we'd stumbled into some strange, otherworldly fairy tale. The backyard stretched out like a sprawling canvas, its tall trees looming like ancient guardians, and their thick canopies casting vast, deep shadows across the land. There was a majestic, slightly decrepit treehouse perched high in one of the old oak trees. Its faded wood whispered memories of forgotten adventures. To my delight, my parents gave me free rein over the treehouse, despite its dilapidated appearance. It seemed to beckon me. At 9 years old, I was too young to know that there is a fine line between adventure and danger. But that line became blurred, very quickly, in that treehouse. What started as the usual childhood excitement soon descended into something far darker, something I wasn't prepared for, something I couldn't shake from my mind no matter how hard I tried. The first note appeared on the third day after moving in. I had spent the morning decorating the inside of my treehouse with what little scrap paper I'd scavenged from the moving boxes. As I reached behind a loose board to adjust one of the flimsy paper chains, my hand brushed against something. A crumpled sheet of paper. With cautious fingers, I opened it up and read the scrawled words on the thin, yellowed page. "Hello, I'm the Marshmallow Man. It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, convinced this was some prank my older brothers had set up. They loved playing jokes on me after all. However, when I glanced around the treehouse, I realized something unsettling. I had been alone the entire time. Not a single soul had entered my space since I'd arrived, save for the occasional bird. With a mixture of childish excitement and discomfort, I wrote my name in messy ink and tucked the note back under the floorboard, just where I had found it. Surely I was just caught in a simple game of pretend. But that night, the unease gnawed at my stomach. I barely slept, tossing and turning in my bed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next afternoon, after a restless night, I ventured back to my beloved treehouse, fully expecting the usual game. Sure enough, there was another note. But this time, the message sent a chill up my spine. It read, "What's your favorite thing to do at night? When do you like to go outside to play?" I could feel my blood run cold. These were questions I hadn't shared with anyone, certainly not my brothers. I had not told them I liked staying up late in the backyard under the moonlight, sneaking around in the shadows where it felt safe. I felt the first real stirrings of dread. Still, I shrugged it off. It was all just a weird game, I reasoned. But that night I dared not venture outside. The tapping on my window, soft at first, seemed almost deliberate, timed to scare me. Tap, tap, tap. I got up to check, my heart racing as each second of silence passed. But when I peered out into the stillness of the night, there was nothing there. Only shadows dancing in the wind, the leaves rustling eerily in the distance. The tapping stopped abruptly. The following day brought a different kind of horror. I stood before my bedroom window as the sun began to sink below the horizon. But when I opened the curtains to peek outside, I stopped dead in my tracks. Dozens of marshmallows, those unnaturally soft, sticky blobs, were plastered to the outside of the glass. They were squished tightly between the window panes, some even pressing against the frame as if trying to get inside, the sugary sweetness of them fouling the air in a way that felt wrong, unnervingly wrong. They looked alive, almost. I backed away from the window, my legs weak, my mind racing to come up with a logical explanation. None came. I rushed downstairs, but my parents, engrossed in their usual evening routines, barely noticed my panic. I confronted my older brothers, but both denied knowing anything about the marshmallow invasion. For days, the notes continued, one after another, building on each other, each one more disturbing than the last. One afternoon, I found this. "Which window is your bedroom?" That was the breaking point. They knew something. They knew too much. I crumpled the note in my trembling hands and with frantic breath dashed outside. My voice faltered as I demanded answers, my brothers teasing me, pretending to have no clue about what was happening. As nightfall fell, I found the note had been replaced. Again. What do your pajamas smell like? It was enough to drive a 9-year-old mad. I didn't sleep that night. My heart hammered as I lay in my bed, the shadows of the room seeming to shift and twist before my eyes. Tap, tap, tap. It started again, the soft knocking on my bedroom window. My body froze, unwilling to obey my instincts. Slowly, I approached the window and cautiously pulled back the curtain. What I saw made my blood run cold. Standing on the other side of the window was a figure, a towering, grotesque shape. His eyes, hollow and yellow, were almost too large for his face, staring back at me as if they could see directly into my soul. His smile was wide, too wide, stretching unnaturally around his face. His teeth were sharp, broken, rotting in places. His clothes were thin and ragged, torn beyond recognition. His skin, pale and greyish, clung to his bones like paper. And yet, there he stood. And he wasn't smiling. He was watching. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the creature vanished. I blinked once, twice, but the figure was gone. The figure that shouldn't have existed. I screamed, but the sound was caught in my throat, strangled. The next morning, my parents, distracted, still oblivious, insisted that it was all a bad dream, that it was just an overactive imagination. But the marshmallows kept showing up. The messages kept appearing. And one thing I realized then, the notes stopped, but the tapping never did. Tap, tap, tap. As I stepped into my treehouse to take down the last of the notes, I felt something, or someone, watching me. From the corner of my eye, I could see something in the distance, past the fence, past the trees, the faintest glimpse of something moving. And that, I never saw again, because I ran away from that place. I didn't look back, but a piece of me knew that the Marshmallow Man would always wait for me. And maybe, just maybe he's waiting for someone else, somewhere. The Treehouse. The house we moved into wasn't extraordinary, just another creaky Victorian on the outskirts of a forgotten little town. The yard was sprawling and wild, with tall grass brushing the walls of the house, and gnarled trees looming like silent watchers. It had been empty for years, my parents said, but no one could explain why. And then there was the treehouse. It stood in the yard, half hidden by an overgrown oak tree. Unlike any treehouse I'd ever seen before, it wasn't cheerful or welcoming. Its wooden boards sagged with age, paint peeling off in long, curling strips. A single window, set slightly askew, seemed to leer down at the yard like a crooked eye. Most kids would have been scared of it immediately, and I was, at first. But then, it called to me. I can't say how or why. There was nothing audible, no whisper in the wind or tug at my thoughts. Yet the moment I saw it, something rooted deep inside me, some primal instinct, told me not to go near it. Naturally, being 10 years old, I ignored the feeling. The first few days, I didn't go up. I'd stand at the base of the tree, squinting at the crooked ladder nailed into the bark. The steps were old and uneven, almost like teeth in a giant broken mouth. Still, I couldn't stop looking at it. It's hard to explain. It didn't feel like the treehouse was abandoned. It felt occupied. And then, one afternoon, I climbed up. The boards creaked under my weight, the wood groaning like an old man reluctantly waking up. My hand trembled as I gripped the edge and pulled myself into the opening. Inside, it smelled of dust and age. The space was small, just big enough for a few kids to sit and whisper secrets, though the only thing in there was silence. I stood still for what felt like forever, listening. But there was nothing. No creak of wood, no rustling of leaves, just an oppressive quiet that made my ears ring. That was when I noticed the writing. Faint carvings covered the walls, thousands of words and symbols gouged into the wood. Most of it was too faded to make sense of, but I could read some words. Don't stay after dark. It lives here. You'll never leave. I climbed down fast that day, swearing I'd never go back. But of course I did. Something about the treehouse wouldn't let me leave it alone. It became an obsession. Then, one day, I found the journal. It was hidden beneath a loose floorboard, nestled in a hollowed-out pocket of wood. The cover was warped and rotting, but when I opened it, the pages inside were oddly preserved. The writing belonged to a boy named Daniel, who had lived here decades ago. He wrote about the treehouse, how it spoke to him, how it promised him secrets, how it told him he was special. But as the entries continued, they grew darker. Daniel described waking up in the middle of the night to whispers outside his window. He talked about seeing shadows move through the walls. And finally, he wrote about a presence in the treehouse, something he called the Keeper. It watches from the window, one entry read. It waits for you to be alone. Once it sees you, it never stops. The final entry was smeared and almost unreadable, but I made out one chilling line. I can't leave. It won't let me. That night, the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind brushing against the windows. But as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized the sound was coming from outside. Low, faint murmurs, rising and falling like distant voices caught on the breeze. Against my better judgment, I went to the window. The treehouse window stared back at me, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow move inside it. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, the pull of the treehouse grew stronger. I couldn't focus on anything else. Even when I wasn't near it, I could feel its presence, like an itch in my brain I couldn't scratch. Then one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself standing at the base of the tree again. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, just to prove to myself that there was nothing there. The climb felt longer this time. Each rung groaned beneath my weight, the wood biting into my palms. The air grew colder the higher I climbed, unnaturally cold for a summer evening. When I pulled myself inside, I knew instantly that I'd made a mistake. The treehouse was different. The shadows didn't feel like shadows anymore. They moved. The carvings on the walls seemed to shift and writhe when I wasn't looking directly at them. And the whispers. They were louder now, circling the space like a soft, malevolent chant. I was about to climb down when I heard the thud. It came from the floor beneath me, faint but deliberate. I froze, heart pounding. Another thud followed, closer this time. And then, something spoke. Not in words, not exactly, but in a low, guttural sound that filled the space. It was as if the treehouse itself was breathing, alive and hateful. Stay. I scrambled down the ladder, nearly falling in my panic. The sound followed me, a deep, wet creaking that seemed to vibrate through the wood. As I hit the ground and turned to look back, I saw it. A face. Pale, hollow, and stretched unnaturally thin. It stared at me from the window of the treehouse, its mouth twisted into an impossibly wide grin. After that, I refused to go near the treehouse. But it didn't matter. The treehouse came to me. Every night, I'd wake to the same whispers, the same faint creak of footsteps outside my window. Sometimes I'd hear tapping against the glass, light and rhythmic, as if beckoning me to look. The last time I saw it, the face wasn't in the treehouse anymore. It was in my room. I don't know how I escaped. I don't know if I did escape, because sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I still hear the whispers. And somewhere, out there in the dark, the treehouse is still waiting. For the next one. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more, and share it with your friends. Your support means the world to me. Stay tuned for more, and remember, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop exploring the unknown.